Welcome to the Get Published podcast, sponsored by Brodie Consulting Group. To get more information about our coaching, publishing, executive ghostwriting, and podcast production services, go to getpublishedpodcast.com. Hello, I am Paul Brodie, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Get Published podcast, where we help authors get published with a proven system that works. Today, we're being joined by Tiffany Cullen, author of Form X. Tiffany, welcome to the show.
Hi, Paul. Thanks for having me on.
Are you ready to get started?
I am.
All right. Question number one. What is the one piece of advice that you would give to a first-time author who is currently writing their book?
So this is a tough one. I think most people generally give advice about prose or editing, but I'd say you should really write something that's unique to you. So don't write something that you think fits in the current meta or that you think will be make you popular or financially fit, really because that's what lots of writers are doing anyway, but mainly because it's not very fulfilling. So finding a subject that you care about and the one that you think others will feel just as passionately about is something that I really recommend for writers who don't really know where to go yet. And it's kind of that genuine care that you have that propels you forward. And if you ever have like writer's block or something that you're not feeling great about, that's usually because it's not something that you're very passionate about. So I think finding that specific niche that's unique to you is really the viable route.
And what do you feel is the hardest part about getting published?
So this was a very tough thing for me due to the fact that there are so many worthwhile books being published right now. So I find it's really hard to stand out. So finding a publisher or a mentor who has connections can be really daunting, often because it seems like you're competing with the whole world. And I think that's exactly why I did the self-publishing route, because like constant rejection, that can make you really avoid going forward. And that's what makes self-publishing such an easy thing to do from the get-go. But that usually doesn't give people the same opportunities or the same kind of traction. So I think like developing a thicker skin and being patient will give any writer the motivation needed to continue trying to be published.
Well, this transitions nicely into our next question because it's about the marketing portion of this. So please share a marketing strategy that you have used in your book launch that worked well.
So I think that my book might be a unique case due to the fact that I wrote it for one specific audience. But what worked the best for me was taking it to the source. So every one of these 70 poems was based on a specific 4chan board or community. So I'd throw one onto a Google Doc and post it on there for people to see. So I could monitor the traffic back to my website or monitor the sale count. And that's how I noticed that it was effective. So before that, I'd send my books to an independent poetry magazine or different websites of that nature, hoping that they'd give my book a review or a shout out, but that never worked. So finding my target audience and marketing specifically to them, specifically by offering free content first, really demonstrated the best results.
So you actually created a Google Doc, and was this placed on your website, or were you placing this on a specific poetry website?
This was placed on my website, and then I would post that to the target audience.
So almost like a blog, but not quite, right?
Yes. And that was just so I could see how many numbers it was hitting.
Well, and in regards to Google Docs, so you're using the Google Docs specifically so you could track everything?
Yes. And that's just the easiest for most people to see. I wanted it to be as accessible as possible.
And then, so you did this for the one poem. Did you do this for the other poems as well, or what was your strategy beyond that?
Yes, I did this individually for each poem. So I'd leave one on for a full day, get the numbers, and then move on to each one individually.
And did you take off, so you took off that poem at the end of the day, is that right?
Yes.
So it's almost like a 24-hour Snapchat, so to speak.
Yes, very much.
And then they realized it was a limited time, so they needed to check it out that day. So you had that call to action, and you also had that sense of urgency to go along with it.
Exactly.
And what were you doing to bring traffic to your website? So were you doing any type of advertising? Were you sending out to a list? How were you actually getting the traffic to come to your website?
So I tried to sign up for like those weekly newsletters, and no one ever actually allowed me on. So I just did it firsthand. So I would post these poems individually on my website. And let's say I wanted to post a poem to like the sports board. So I would go to that sports board and I would make my own thread and monitor it, bump it, because there's a bump limit. If the thread isn't getting posts, it just will die. So I would do that and go to Twitter and kind of monitor both to make sure that they're still active.
And then what sites were you using for the forums, or you can say in general if you want to, because it sounds like you're utilizing like different boards and then using that and boosting that with different comments or getting different comments in,
Yes.
and then bringing it that way.
So I would only post the poems on 4chan. So every poem was about 4chan, and I only used that main home website to advertise because that's where the entire audience relies.
So 4chan was where your target audience was. You advertised there, you do your promotions, and then that brought that traffic over to your website.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, great.
The website was more of just like the host.
Got it. So I don't want to say necessarily it's like a Reddit, so to speak, but probably similar conceptually
It's
wise.
very similar to Reddit. Yes, if you had to compare it to any other site.
Okay. Well, cool. Thank you. Believe it or not, with 155 episodes, and you were the first one that's actually talked about utilizing these different forms and message boards. So it's such a great strategy.
Oh, yeah, that's really unique. That's interesting.
Well, let's talk about your favorite book. So what is your favorite book, and what was the number one thing that you learned from it?
So this was really difficult. I went with Crime and Punishment, and really simply because it taught me three aspects that I think a worthwhile piece of writing should always contain. And that's standing the test of time, and then containing some kind of universality, as in appealing to different cultures and countries, and still presenting something core, something human, which kind of transcends nations or politics. And lastly, I think it's one of the most memorable books I've ever read and is extremely unique. So the book creates a unique world that I haven't found anywhere else. So something that stands so uniquely, I think, whether it's something that you connect with, something that you find personally appealing, that kind of transcends that because it kind of stands on its own. So that's certainly why Crime and Punishment is my favorite. And I think it's the most memorable book I've ever read, and nothing has really ever come close.
And for a final question, what is your favorite quote and why?
This is another one. So Crime and Punishment is by Dostoevsky. I really like Russian literature. So this quote is from Oblomov. And the quote is, "Now or never, to be or not to be, Oblomov raised himself from his chair a little, but failing to find his slippers with his feet at once, sat down again. But what was he to do? Stay where he was or move on? This Oblimovian question was for him of even deeper significance than Hamlet's to be or not to be." So this quote's kind of silly, but it's also really relatable because I think all writers have experienced like a wall or a lack of motivation, and not necessarily writer's block or the inability to continue working, but more of like an apathetic approach. So Oblomov stays in the same spot day by day. He lacks life experience, and that breeds his lack of passion. And I think anyone can find this quote motivational because you're able to place yourself in Oblomov's shoes. But the way I read it is it's kind of telling you to better yourself and your writing, and it never hinders on coming to like a piece of paper or a keyboard with a lack of experience. So it's difficult to expand upon your writing if you have nothing to say. So I think this quote really wants you to use every excuse you can to develop new relationships or take risks, and it'll only make your writing more interesting and allow you to better understand an audience as you may come to a better understanding regarding how individuals interpret different texts or scenarios.
Well, Tiffany, I want to thank you for being a guest on the show. What is the best way for people to find you online?
I am Xenoplanet across all boards, including Twitter. Xenoplanet is XENOPLANET.
Well, Tiffany, I want to thank you once again for being on the show, and I wish you all the best in your author journey ahead.
Thank you so much, Paul. This was great.
Thanks again for joining us today. To learn more about how you can be featured in our brand new Get Published business book, go to getpublishedpodcast.com.